This is Ryan Lang. I'm from Drexel University. Today we're going to be talking about Android malware HummingBad. And what we're going to be talking about first is Android, and it's really in a bad state of fragmentation. We're going to be talking about what HummingBad really is, how it works, why it was created, who created it, and very importantly, we're going to be talking about mitigation techniques. You need People are going to need to know how to detect it, prevent it, and remove it. The state of Android is, as I said, fragmented. The problem really is in two parts. Google is creating updates. Google is distributing them to manufacturers. They're available. And the manufacturers may or may not choose to implement them. And if that happens, then the carriers may or may not choose to implement them. And what happens is the users who are downstream end up with very few options whether or not to upgrade, and they really can't do much about it. So you have all these critical vulnerabilities that are just open. The FCC is actually going to be investigating this, and it'll be very interesting what they find. They're investigating, as they say, the process of how they go through and decide when and when not to update. They're also including iOS, which should be an interesting contrast. That's because iOS is in a very different state. Essentially, it's not fragmented. There are some people who don't update, but by far most do, and at least it's a choice, it's available. Even far back as the iPhone 4S, that's half a decade ago. It's currently, as of this moment, still supported. Now, Google has attempted to emulate this with the Nexus, and we're going to explore a little more about that later. Now, HummingBad is also known as adware. That's because it primarily displays ads. It's probably the first thing people are going to notice. It also can download apps and create fake ratings in the App Store. So that's what it does. Now, a little bit about the background of it. It's believed to be part of the Shidan family of malware. There's been a few things about it. Another branch of it would be brain test, and they all have similar behavior and infection techniques where how they try to get in is based off of those exploits. And they'll try to gain root access into the device so that they can do anything. And it may reinstall itself on factory reset. So you may try to get rid of it and not. Now, 10 million Android devices have been discovered, and there's some accurate metrics on that. And it's known to infect in a variety of ways. One is drive-by downloads, so websites that have malicious scripts on them can infect, say, a phone. Third-party app stores, that's been documented that Shidan malware has been found in those app stores. It's not a maybe, it's old news at this point. Unfortunately, what's also old news is that it's been found and removed from, so far as we know, the Google Play Store. So Google's own store has been found with very similar malware to HummingBad. It's essentially the same thing, at least mostly. Now, if we look at some numbers here, these older versions of Android are by far the most vulnerable, but with 10 million being infected and Android having so few new devices out there and new versions of the OS being adopted, that 1% of, well, when this was written, it was the newest version. They recently released Nougat. But that's a lot of their newest version that is still being infected. Um, Now, what's really, the ads may sound benign, and even ratings may sound benign, anything, but what it can do is, simply stated, anything. The sandboxing allows it, sandboxing usually protects software, and with root access, it can bypass it. It can steal data, including passwords that are supposed to be protected. It can install more malicious apps than it currently is. such as ransomware. It could easily create a botnet that could be used for a DDNS to attack servers. It could also sell that access to a variety of people, governments, companies for corporate espionage. So this really has a lot of potential, and we're rather lucky that it's not doing more. Now, it was discovered by Check Point, a company you probably are familiar with. They're the makers of Zone Alarm. They've been making that since Windows in the 90s. And it was discovered this year, February, early this year. And it was actually discovered with their mobile threat prevention software. That's a Android software that it has an emulator that the HummingBad actually tried to infect the emulator, and their software caught it and notified the people. It was at one of their customers who then notified Check Point, and they analyzed it, and they found that it was trying to connect to a command and control server, which they then infiltrated for 5 months. That's how they got those metrics. That's how we know there's 10 million infections and actually more. And it was created and controlled by a company called YingMob. YingMob is actually a mobile advertising firm. They do have a legitimate business, and obviously this is not that branch connected to HummingBad. The way that they found these metrics was actually through an analytics software called Umeng. It's used to track advertising campaigns. And so they were able to see pretty much everything. As you can see, they have their address, they have what they were making a day. They also found that it wasn't just 10 million from HummingBad, but there's have other malware that they control, which actually puts the number at 85 million. So that's a lot. And as you can see, this is a chart from their white paper that it's been steadily increasing. The number of people that are infected by this is increasing and will continue to do so. I should mention that there is some controversy over the She-Done connection. Lookout claims that they're the same. They're the discoverers of BrainTest and She-Done itself. Check Point cites 11 Paths Research. They use and make a product called TACT, and it's an analysis software. It found that the files underlying it were different, and so were the certificates and some other things such as domains, and they actually suggest that they're owned and operated by different companies. Now, this really, for our purposes, doesn't really change anything. The symptoms, we're going to cover those and how to scan for it, and it really is not affected by the She-Done controversy. Things pretty much stay the same either way. Now, for the symptoms, we already covered this a little bit, but when you see strange advertisements, if your phone starts to display a lot of pop-ups, if your phone has persistent advertising, especially on apps that should be free of advertising, these are signs that some kind of adware has infected you, and with the prevalence of HummingBad, it's definitely the first thing that, in my mind, it could be. Now, apps. It installs apps. It's one of the ways it monetizes, and that is another key thing. If there are a lot of or a few unfamiliar apps on your phone, and you've never heard of them before, or maybe they look similar to something but not quite, that's a red flag. That's definitely one of the things that the app can do. And also, if there are ratings that you did not write, and on software you've never heard of, apps you've never heard of, that's also a telltale sign that HummingBad or a She-Done variant has infected your phone. So how can you be sure? Well, CNET makes note that there's a variety of scanning software that can be a little more definitive than just these symptoms. Zone Alarm is made by Check Point, who discovered HummingBad, so they're obviously would be the first on the list. Avast and AVG can also scan for it. These methods are pretty well known, and those are very well known pieces of software, known for their Windows antivirus software. Lookout is also another good one. They may not be as well known, but Lookout are the ones who claim to have discovered She-Done last year and the variant BrainTest. So those will tell you what you have and if it's there. And it's going to be by far better to prevent than to remove. Unfortunately, there is no removal tool for HummingBad at this time. So the removal methods are going to be rather drastic. Prevention, you've basically got three choices. You can use a device that receives updates because the lack of updates are the problem. Use safe mobile practices, which we're going to go into detail about that. And we're going to educate, and if you educate users about permissions, and it's a rather specific thing, which we're going to address in a moment. Prevention, obviously we want things that received updates. Apple's iOS fits the bill. This is kind of out of bounds and a little radical because it's not an Android device, but it might be a suitable replacement and it should be considered. Google Nexus is probably a more conventional option because it will run Android, and the Nexus devices with updates coming straight from Google, obviously if they're cutting out all the blocks, then this is going to be a very good option. So this is one way that you can protect yourself is by using a Google Nexus device, especially a newer one that's receiving updates. Prevention, in the research, the white papers, they specifically note that adult websites have been known for distributing those drive-by downloads and infecting systems. So you should stay clear of those. Obviously, don't use third-party down stores. The same for sideloading with apps, which basically is an installation technique. And again, the Google Play App Store is not 100% safe. So you need to be careful. You need to download software that comes from a notable software maker, obviously Google, Microsoft, or EA Games, from sources that are reliable and well known. The further you go away from a well-known piece of software, the more dangerous you're going to be. And if you're on a piece of software or a piece of hardware that has sensitive material, you're going to want to be as safe as possible on it. Now, as for user education, permissions, this is a little tricky because in theory, some of these 1% may have been infected because the software just asked. What it does is if you can't find an exploit, it mimics a notification and then just asks the user to update it. And a lot of them will say yes. So that's something they need to be aware of. Now, elimination, first of all, none of these methods are going to preserve the user data. So you're going to have good backup methods. With that said, there's three methods: resetting the Android device, flashing the ROM, and destroying the device. Now, the elimination method is recommended by CNET, but not by me. It may not work because it copies files to a partition called /system, and that's used when you reset the device. So when you reset it, then it reinstalls itself. So if you try it, download some software to scan it and make sure that it's removed. Now, flashing the ROM, this is recommended by Lookout, who discovered Cheaton. And also, one of the great things about it is that with Google's Nexus, you have the files right there. So you're going to make sure you get it from the manufacturer, which obviously from Nexus is very easy. In fact, this is the website you would go to. It has the instructions, the system images, everything's just right here. So the instructions, if you can see that, they're pretty simple, but it's going to involve the command line. You have to unlock the device, load everything up, and then lock it again. But there's the link. There's how to fix it if you have a Nexus device. And obviously, if you need to, you may have to just get rid of the device. It depends on costs. It depends on what kind of device it is. Are there updates? But that's something to definitely consider. In summary, HummingBad is malware and may not seem like much now, but it has a lot of potential to do bad. And best prevention is to use a device that's up to date. Removing it is easiest with a Nexus device. And the all this is really because the Android ecosystem is in such bad shape. Thank you.